Good evening. Welcome to another lens review thing, everyone, and on the menu today, the Nikon Z-24-200mm f4 to 6.3 VR. People have been asking me to review this full-frame super zoom lens for a long time, and I'm so pleased to have finally got around to it. This lens arrived just in time for me to take it on a short holiday to North Wales with me, and that's the kind of thing a super zoom lens is perfect for when you're with your spouse and children and you just want a long range zoom lens so that you can have fun taking pictures without fiddling around changing lenses all day long, trying to impress everyone else with all your gear like the middle-aged overgrown man-child with too much disposable income that you are. The typical disadvantages of a super zoom lens include lower image quality and a darker maximum aperture, and with a maximum aperture of only f4 to 6.3, this isn't the best lens for shooting in the dark or getting deeply out of focus backgrounds. Its price seems to fluctuate a little, but it's about $900 or about £900 here in the UK. I'd like to thank Nikon UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. It will only work on Nikon Z-mount mirrorless cameras FX or DX. Let's look at its build quality first. Nikon's mid-range lenses are generally quite plasticky, but well assembled, and this is no exception. It may not feel like it's carved out of granite, but the lens does feel solid, and it's based on a metal lens mount with a weather sealing gasket. It's dust and splash resistant, but for the best protection, you should also put a UV or a neutral filter on the front. Towards the rear there's a control ring which can be set to change the manual focus or other functions. It turns very smoothly and the manual focus response is excellent, very precise. As you can see here, the lens suffers from surprisingly little focus breathing. Whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out, that is helpful for video work potentially. The lens's autofocus motor is surprisingly quick and confident. It works real nice. I found that eye detection autofocus was a bit inaccurate though, although to be honest that's probably more a reflection of the older Nikon Z7 camera that I was using. As the VR in the lens's title suggests, this lens is image stabilized. Here's some footage with stabilization turned off and now turned on. This footage was shot on a fairly windy day, and as you can see it's working pretty well, which will really help you to get sharper still images and smoother handheld video work. At the front of the lens we have the rubberized zoom ring, which turns smoothly and a little heavily with almost no stickiness, really enjoyable to use and potentially good for video work. The front filter size is 67mm wide and the lens comes with a little plastic hood. Overall, the build quality here is really very nice, and at only 570 grams, or about 1¼ pounds, it's not heavy. Okay, let's move on and look at image quality now. I'll be testing it on a Nikon Z7 camera with its 45 megapixel full frame sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. At 24mm and f4, in the middle of the image, we are seeing biting sharpness and excellent contrast right away. Corner image quality though is way less encouraging, with a lot of softness and prominent purple fringing. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 for good improvements in sharpness, although if anything that purple fringing seems to get even stronger. The lens stays this sharp down to f11, f16 though will look softer due to the effects of diffraction. Let's zoom in halfway to 100mm now. The maximum aperture has quickly darkened to f6.3. In the middle of the image, we're still seeing great sharpness and good contrast. The corner image quality looks way better now that we've zoomed in. Although it's still not the sharpest image I've ever seen, it's good. Stop down to f8 for just an edge of extra sharpness, but f11 sees no further improvement. Okay, let's zoom all the way in now to 200mm. Sharpness is still very good in the middle of the image, but contrast is slightly lower than before, and well, it's kind of the same story in the corners really, although contrasting edges look just a touch softer there. Stop down to f8 for a little more brightness and contrast across the image frame, but that's as sharp as the image quality gets at 200mm. Still, for a lens with such a long zoom range on a 45 megapixel full frame sensor, this is generally a much better performance than average. At the widest angles, you need to stop down for sharp corner image quality, Everywhere else, the lens is reasonably sharp, so it's a good, consistent performance here. Okay, let's bypass in-camera corrections by shooting in RAW and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 24mm, we get the kind of barrel distortion you expect on a super zoom lens, and dark corners at f4. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 though to see them really brighten up. Zoom into 35mm and that distortion really straightens out. Zoom in all the way to 200mm and we're treated to some pretty hefty pincushion distortion now, and again dark corners at the brightest apertures. Stop down to f8 or f11 for those to brighten up again. So it's a typically poor performance for a super zoom lens here. Be sure to keep those problems corrected, which your camera should automatically do for you. The lens's minimum focus distance is a pretty short 50cm, getting you nice and close to smaller subjects, as you can see. The good news is that close-up image quality remains quite sharp, although contrast is a little down at f6.3. Stop down to f8 for a bit more punchiness. Let's see how the lens works against bright lights now. At 24mm, we see a little flaring, but nothing too serious. Zoom in and it gets more prominent, but mostly just when bright lights are directly in the picture. Finally, let's see about the quality of this lens's bokeh. As I mentioned before, it's actually not easy to get out of focus backgrounds with this lens, but when you do, they look averagely soft. No obvious problems to note here, really. Overall, this is a sharper than average super zoom lens. You're still getting those typical super zoom lens compromises, a dark aperture and somewhat softer image quality than on a prime lens, but for a 24-200mm optic, it's doing a fairly good job, and it's a nice zoom range undeniably. If you want something a bit sharper with a brighter aperture, you might also consider the Nikon Z-24-120mm f4, which is an astonishingly high quality optic in its own right, but the 24-200 is a little cheaper with a longer zoom range. It's nice to have a choice, isn't it? It comes recommended. So, as the world's greatest YouTube photography influencer, well, maybe the 8th or 9th greatest, it costs a lot to maintain my lifestyle. Bollinger champagne, followed by Cuban cigars are on the menu for breakfast, followed by a whole 2 hours a day seated on my solid gold throne, editing these reviews, while a team of professional physiotherapists massage my shoulders. Who am I kidding? It's actually a lot of work to keep these free independent reviews trucking on, so I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters who are making such a big difference. Supporters get all kinds of bonus videos and content, so check it out in the description below, and ciao for now, everyone.